Hi. Thank you. All right. Well, I think all of you know us, right? But yeah, this is Chris. I go by Priya. So we're actually going to kind of go two folds with this. We're going to talk about passive network monitoring solutions and why medical device cybersecurity needs to be within healthcare technology management programs, and just UHS's experience selecting and implementing a solution. So just some session objectives, again, reviewing what HTM groups need to do with medical device cybersecurity, some key strategies and tactics, and we look at how you can analyze your current state of the program, develop some use cases, measure success throughout the selection and implementation process, and then we'll also go over some really good insight around building service models and governance models from Chris, and his experience throughout a proof of concept.
Hey, thanks, Priya. So a little bit about UHS, Universal Health Services. We have nothing to do with agility. I get that all the time. But Universal Health is a for-profit health system like ACA and Tenet. And we have about 90,000 employees, 28 acute care hospitals across the United States. We're building a 29th up in Reno, Nevada that's set to open in March of 2022. And numerous behavioral health facilities, lots of different, we're really big into freestanding emergency departments and building those all over the country. And then our behavioral health facilities are all over the United States. The UK, we have about 200 facilities in the UK. And then the Caribbean as well, we have a handful of facilities. Next slide. About me, I run the HTM program at UHS. I've been with third party as well as OEM companies. I was a product manager for Datascope back in the day. Past chair of the AV Credentials Institute and steering committee member for the NDSC, if you were in the last session with Dave Francoeur. And Priya put that picture of me up there. And yeah, I fly an airplane and enjoy that going all over the country.
Okay, a little bit about Asimily for folks that don't know. We're actually, we founded in 2017, but I think Shankar, our CEO, and the group have been there for much longer, since I've known them like from 2014 or 15. Again, based out of the Silicon Valley, and we are particularly healthcare focused. We are not yet venturing into other areas, so we can remain committed to our healthcare customers. And if you look at the scale of deployment, we have deployed over 1,600 sites and actively exploring sites outside the USA as well. Just the leadership team, again, experts from the HTM background, cybersecurity, networking, and data analytics. And our engineering team is super strong. And most of us come from a healthcare or a cybersecurity background. We're not just software folks that develop a product and just let you figure it out. And we have a handful of advisors like Steve Grimes and Axel, and former CEOs from Symantec, Blue Coat, and such. A little bit about me. I now serve as Senior Director of Customer Success at Asimily. So really, there's a solution engineering team that works with health systems at the time of the proof of concept. And once we're in that contractual stage, that's when me and my team, we come into play. We help you right from start to finish with the implementation and also just absorbing what the product has to offer. Other than that, I've been at Banner Health, Intermountain, Stanford, Enterprise really. And I'm an active member of ACC and AMI, and also HTA, which is an alliance between AMI, ACC, and HIMSS. And yeah, I've had a few certifications, and I'm really passionate about helping out the student community, so I serve as a research advisor there. So a little bit about cybersecurity, and I'm just going over some recent stats here. Just in the last 10 years, what we have seen is an average increase in just the reported breaches has been a little over 20%. And if you look at just that one category, about 78% of that is from healthcare providers. So that really kind of lets you think, okay, why do healthcare providers need to think about medical device cybersecurity, or just cybersecurity in general. And then when we look at the annual reported breaches, it's actually tripled now since its first full year of reporting back in 2010. And again, when you're in healthcare, I think it's the really right thing to do and protect the data that has confidential information of the patients. And medical device cybersecurity alone, these medical devices are no longer just electromechanical components. They have a lot of the microprocessor based. Most of them function like PCs, and we've had a lot of interconnectivity just to enhance clinical decision making. And one of the interesting reports I read, and I've actually included a hyperlink in the slide, so if you download the presentation, you can take a look at that. So that's a report from a company called a Cyber Angel back in December of 2020. And these are all of the statistics from a year when the whole world was going through that pandemic, right? They actually found that over 4.7 billion IP addresses, medical images, and access to unprotected servers, all of that information was freely available, and that was from over 67 countries. And medical devices in particular, because a lot of those serve as an exploit path for an attacker. You have open ports, you have weak passwords, default credentials that you can probably Google a service manual or something and you'll get it there. And obviously, when you talk to a lot of the HTM folks or even IT departments within hospitals, that's an area of called unmanaged devices usually. So no one knows what are the firewall rule sets. They don't know about outdated software for the most part, plugins or insecure APIs and more of that, or even kind of what file transfers are happening to and from those medical devices. So it is really a risky area there. Again, talking about risk, you have your patient safety risks, your care delivery risks, privacy, cybersecurity, and business risks. So if your CT system or any of your imaging unit that is high revenue generating, if that becomes unavailable, you're probably looking at patient diversion, or more so if it's in a critical access hospital or a community hospital where it's probably the only system, then you're basically rendering it useless because of cyber events, and you're diverting patients, you're having financial loss, probably even reputational damage there. In other senses, there have actually been lab experiments with medical devices where they've created that environment where engineers can actually break into that device, change alarm functionality, or delay dosage rates of medication, all of that. So you have a lot of cybersecurity risk with that medical device pathway being used as an exploit path. So a lot of the risk when you look at all of these different areas there. Again, one of the things I want Chris to really touch upon is when we know medical device risk and we know the statistics happening within healthcare providers, why do we think that HTM groups or clinical engineering biomed groups are more appropriate to manage the cybersecurity of medical devices? Chris?
Yeah, I think, and I want to touch upon just a little point on the last slide. So these folks, these hackers, are in it for predominantly today, they're in it for the money. I think the risk of them taking over an individual device and changing the medical parameters of that device is probably a lower risk. They want to get into your network. They want to get into your network and do damage, shut you down, where they can charge you a fee to bring the network back up. But what I found, why HTM involved in this aspect, what I found, and Priya touched on it a little bit on the last slide, is your IT team is probably not paying attention to the medical devices. If they are paying attention to them, they don't understand the medical devices, the risks associated with those medical devices, the operating systems, the FDA clearance associated with those devices, as far as updating operating systems and things like that. So I think there's nobody better positioned in the industry than the HTM professional to really work hand in hand with your IT team to provide better security for your patients and your business, the financials of the business. So, we got involved at UHS. My CISO and I are connected at the hip. My CIO pretty much says, Chris, it's you got to give us. You're our consultant with regard to cybersecurity and the medical devices. They're able to segment the network as we work through some of the vulnerable devices and what we need to do to protect those devices, and we can upgrade, right? There's devices that, especially medical lab devices, tend to have very old operating systems, and they don't really update them as frequently as they need to be done. So I think we're perfectly positioned to own this part of cybersecurity. Do you have anything else?
Yeah, I think, just diving into some of the details, HTM departments, we understand the inventory much better than any other department in the hospitals. And second, it's a lot more easier for us to manage vulnerabilities and patch updates because, we obviously have the scheduled and unscheduled maintenance, or your PMs and CMs. So you can actually incorporate patch updates into your PM/CM schedules. And then one of the things with coordinating efforts with the manufacturer, with IT and other information technology departments in the hospital, I think most of us in HTM, we're aware of what's happening on the regulatory and pre-regulatory space as well. So at times when you have an OEM or a manufacturer telling you that they can't give you certain updates because that would void a FDA approval, that that's not true. Because if you look at the post-market guidance document, or even what the manufacturers have in terms of their 806 reporting, that's not true. They need to provide you updates if that's a vulnerability that's going to affect patient safety or patient care in some point of time. And actually, I think we are the best points of contact when you have to educate clinicians, other allied health professionals, and also patients. My experience with that has been to work with nursing and physician community on what's called a cyber 101. Like, give them the basics of why this topic is important. How do they recognize when there's some sort of eccentric activity happening on a medical device? Who do they report to, and how do they, what role do they play in terms of incident management or event management when it comes to cybersecurity? So I think we are the best team members to educate others in the hospital environment. At the same time, with having a governance framework, balancing workload, and also creating a visionary roadmap to make it like a program and not just a 6-month project. I think we are most equipped. So that's really why HTM should really own this program.
Yeah, I call it the sustaining engineering piece, right? Because to Priya's point, they deploy these projects, and we get all of our edge devices connected, and then cool, we're good. Nobody does anything with the data. So we're collecting these massive amounts of data, and nothing is actionable. Nobody's taking any action on the actionable data, I should say.
And I've been on the other end of that, where medical device cybersecurity was dealt with as a 6-month project. It was luckily a small 300 or 400 bed hospital, and all the senior leadership wanted to do was collect all the MDSs from manufacturer, do your risk assessments. We didn't have any tools at that time, so it was just risk assessments using Excel and Word, and then you present things on a PowerPoint or findings to your enterprise architecture, your security architecture teams. And after 6 months, there's really no one assigned to do that.
You check the box.
Yeah, and I was one of the analysts, and I had another analyst with me. We went about collecting all of the network parameters, logging that in our CMMS. We used AIMS at that time, and actually installing port blockers as well, because manufacturers refuse to disable that function, on a BIOS level. So after that 6 months, it's like nothing, and then your program really just goes down the drain.
So let me talk a little bit about our planning at UHS. So we recognized the need, right? There was a need associated with risk of the medical devices. And as I came to conferences like this conference, maybe the Amy conference, I started to educate myself on what these companies were doing. These companies were popping up. CloudPost was one of the early ones, which is now Order. Asimily was there, and Zingbox, and you heard all these names. So I thought something I have to educate myself on. So certainly I started doing that, and then I wanted to sell that to my organization, right? Because my organization wasn't even focused on it. They, my IT team, they were a Cisco house predominantly, and they were looking at some other network tools, Forescout, and Forescout bought a company called Security Matters, and they were trying to convince my IT team that they were good to go, they could do it all, and the Forescout bought Security Matters, and nothing happened. They pretty much dropped that product. So I went to my CIO, my CISO, and more importantly, the senior VP that I report to, used to be the CIO, and convinced them that, hey, look, I have this tool, this opportunity to buy a tool that can help us on a couple of things. One of the things was, to Priya's point earlier, the inventory. We're inventory experts, right? In fact, some of my IT teams use our database. Our financial services group uses our database to manage all the capital assets on the medical life side. So the database has to be rock solid. It has to be the Bible for anything capital medical equipment side. They have full access to my database. It's read-only, of course, but they can see any piece of equipment they want. My supply chain, value analysis, they all have access to my database. And it's funny, I'll be in a meeting, and next thing I know, they're popping up screenshots of my AIMS database. And I'm like, what is she doing? But it's great. I love that they're in it. I love that they're mining the data. So it really was a tool that part of the selling process was, hey, look, what I do now for my team is I require during the PM cycle to fat finger in my MAC address, the IP address, software operating systems, and things like that. So what happens when you're depending on your team to fat finger that stuff in?
It doesn't always get done.
It doesn't get done.
Right.
It doesn't get done. The work it does get done, it gets done incorrectly. It's fat fingering, right? They make a mistake,
Yeah.
they put the wrong letter or wrong number in. So one of the opportunities with a product like Asimily was to integrate that to my AIMS product and be able to replace appropriate MAC addresses and IP addresses if it's static, things like that, or the last known DHCP address. So, we started these gaps. That was one of the gaps in the program was, hey, you know what? When IT does observe some strange activity, they might see an IP address but they don't always know what the device is. So now with we've closed that gap where they can go into the AIMS product and they can see exactly what device it is. Oh, in fact, we were on a call and Priya was on the call the other day. There's an IT workstation that's communicating with Mongolia. Why is that happening? And we'll go into that later on in the presentation. But I think this is what it brings in. The other gaps. So we buy new patient monitoring systems, whether it's a Philips monitoring system or GE monitoring system or something like that. And we have these installers come in and they're setting up your monitors and configuring the ports on the monitors, everything, right? And we go live. And before, we depended on those installation engineers, service technicians from the OEM to set up our devices. Well, one of the first things when we did the POC we did it with 3 different companies, but we found some of those GE monitors configured incorrectly. They had ports wide open. So that was another gap closure that we were able to identify and fix. Again, a vulnerability. It's a real vulnerability, a pathway into your network. The last line or down there, ensure governance over medical device cybersecurity efforts. So the governance, there really needs to be somebody that owns that. And now there is ownership within our organization. And one thing that we didn't understand is what is IT using for existing network security systems? We didn't understand that in the HTM side, so now we do.
Okay, so I know, Chris, you touched upon a few things. What we've seen so far is, one, we know medical device cybersecurity is big. It's not going away anytime soon. Hackers are getting creative, and like what Chris mentioned earlier is, a lot of these hackers, they just want to build a name for themselves in that community, right? And they don't know what is that device behind that hospital network, and they just want to create that name and just look at whatever information is available to exploit a network. So when you actually are looking at selecting a passive network monitoring tool or any sort of network security tool, the first thing you want to do is look at your programmatic gaps and understand what are your true business needs. Am I going to purchase a product that's just going to do what some other tool that I already have, or is it really going to meet my business needs? You don't want any redundancy there. One of the things I found really beneficial back in the organizations I worked with was to use the NIST cybersecurity framework. I think that framework is just beautiful, and I use that term quite literally. It's because it has a lot of the different categories and subcategories that are important from a cybersecurity perspective. It really breaks down those categories, and then HTM departments, along with their IT counterparts, when you review those and you understand what process, what people do I have working on that process, and what technology do I have supporting that process, and you compare that with the categories listed in the cybersecurity framework, and that's where you actually understand what the gap is in your program and what tool or product there is that will help you fill that gap with the right metrics and data. So that's really what you want to do as part of evaluating your program gaps. Second is, list some non-cybersecurity goals. What are some of the goals you want to achieve with improving your cybersecurity score? Second, is there anything from a workflow perspective, or your like I say, the three-pronged approach, your people, process, and technology? Anything from that perspective that you can improve using a particular product? Is it going to help improve your workflow? Avoid fat fingering with all of those attributes. And then identify some metrics that's going to be important to measure how well that workflow is going to work for you. The most important one is identifying resources. And this is based on a hard lesson I have learned, is where programs have worked with just me running it. Programs have worked with when I've had FTEs working for me, and then it's just not worked. It's just gone down the drain after a whole lot of work done when you don't have FTEs to do that. So make sure you have dedicated resources, and I know Chris is going to talk about that as well. And again, like we said, it's not a 6-month project, and pretty much 6 months, you're not even going to get through establishing a proper governance framework. So create a multi-year plan. What's helped me in the past is to have at least a 2 to 3 year plan, working with your internal audit groups in IT and legal compliance, your patient safety committees, explaining what's going on with connected medical devices, and then suggesting to them, what have you done to identify the business requirements, and then what a product can benefit to close those gaps. And then have continuously auditing that with your IT governance, risk and compliance groups, or any other external auditor. That's really helped me in the past with evaluating what a health system truly needs in terms of medical device cybersecurity.
Yeah, and I think that bullet point there, identify metrics. It is important to identify actionable metrics, because I was on a call the other day with our IT security team, and he brought up a screen that showed like 71,000 different potential issues that they needed to look at. Well, how in goodness gracious can you look at 71,000 potential issues to look at? You can't. There's no way. You're going to start to guess at it. And listen, these are the tools that your IT teams are using right now. They're trying to do it the best they can. And I think when we go down the slides, the Asimily tool allows you to really start to target at the 71,000 things that need to be looked at, where you could probably whittle that down to 50, 100 things that are really serious, actionable items that you should be focusing on. not pulling things out of a hat, looking at spending all that time to evaluate and find out, you know what, that was blocked by our tools. So
How many biomeds in the room? I'm just curious. Or how many HTM groups? Okay. And then CMMS vendors, okay. Any IT security folks? I know Ben, yeah.
I do.
Okay. All right. I just wanted to know that, I know we're going to go over some metrics, qualitative and quantitative. So just wanted to understand so I can touch upon some
does
interesting
Mercy have an
stories.
IoT tool?
Zingbox.
Zingbox.
Okay.
When it first came out, I was at a conference. They're kind of the only game
Yeah.
out there.
Yeah.
And so I introduced them and we did a pilot and they liked what they saw. So we've been using it for several years.
Yep.
Yep.
Who owns that? Who owns?
Oh, what
No,
department?
no, yeah,
Oh,
what?
which department?
So really our security team, they own it and watch it, but if they see any alerts, they send it to me and a few others, and then we get with now our HTM team is GE,
Yeah.
but we send it to whatever hospital. Hey, you need to go look at this device. We're seeing some possible malware. So,
But to Ben's point, Palo Alto Networks is
Yeah.
who acquired Zingbox.
yeah.
A lot of times that framework works too, because I know IT has a better leverage with getting budget and hiring FTEs more than HTM groups too. I've had my share of struggle with that, so I just let cybersecurity pay for a tool, so they'll let me hire someone to then use the tool. So that the kind of having a bypass route has worked for me as well. But coming back to program gaps, I think one of the most important things we miss with program gaps is looking at what documentation we currently have. Again, the first step is to work with your supply chain and understand the procurement process, because, and this is something we have touched upon in numerous conferences, is look at your process and understand what you're doing when you're bringing in those devices into the organization. Is it something that a clinician will just go to a CFO, he'll come back from a fancy conference, go to the CFO, get their approval, bring in a device, and you only get to know when that manufacturer is actually installing it, and they need to work with biomed just to put a sticker on.
Excellent point. So our new process, something that they wanted to work all along, but we just went through a new capital tool. So I look at everything in Missouri. They just go through capital and I see if has it gone through security review. If it hasn't, they cannot purchase it, got to PO until we do a security review and it has to pass, and then they can cut a PO. So they've really clamped down on that.
When does the MDS2 document come into play? Like if let's say it's a net new technology, it's a net new device, you don't have an MDS2 document from, let's say GE patient monitoring. You already have that, right? But if it's a net new, when is that MDS2 document obtained?
No, we don't know. But okay, IT has their standard form of questions that goes to every vendor. They have to fill it out.
Yeah.
Then we do a 1-hour security review. And out of that review, all the things that didn't meet, have to use standard operating procedures, get people to delete PHI and all kinds of stuff. Then maybe the password doesn't meet what we do. So I have to make the department sign off on a SOP that they'll promise to do all that. That's how it works. That's our approach.
So one of the things that worked for me, and we had a similar approach back when I was at Banner too, but obviously once I started talking about cybersecurity, it was a lot of raised eyebrows, and we didn't know this was happening actually. So a very twisted process, but what worked was supply chain gets the notification that some clinical evaluation is going to happen. I got looped into it, so HTM got looped into it, and then I worked very closely with GRC almost on a regular basis. So, they got looped in and we spent countless hours doing a risk review, getting MDS2, getting SBOMs, all of that documentation from the vendor. Again, a very inefficient process, but it just worked. I don't want to make it promotional, but one of the things, Asimily, what we're doing, and a key or a unique differentiator compared to other products, sorry, Ben, is we actually consume that SBOM and MDS2 information into our ProSecure tool, and that is intended for procurement itself. And we digitize that information, and rather than you spending your time and effort on compiling a risk review, we do that, and you can actually compare a device with different software versions, different configurations or clinical workflows, and look at what is your final risk score. And then just evaluate that with your clinic or your business owner and your IT and see whether your organization is ready to assume the liability considering that risk with that particular configuration of the device. So one of the things that's going back to the slide is understanding your procurement process. Another way to do it is if you have your CMMS and your ERP tool, they talk to each other. And let's say if your IT tool also talks, you can create a notification pathway between all three of them, wherein there is a request created with supply chain that shoots off an alert to your ServiceNow or any other ITSM, and then your CMMS folks or your HTM groups is then notified. So you can then coordinate on collecting the MDS2s. So over time, what we did at Banner was to improve that process. So, and then what I gave them was an implementation guideline. So we know all of the different system hardening controls we need to have from, your NIST 853 or from your MDS2 document. What I created was, what does that particular hardening control mean? And then what is an implementation guideline or what's an acceptable implementation that Banner wants from the manufacturer? So that was a very, it was another version of a Cyber 101 intended for supply chain. So when they talk to manufacturers, they would go over that form rather than looping in someone from HTM or GRC and say, oh, this is not approved from Banner's side, so we need you to talk to them. That's when we would get involved with them. So that's another interesting take that you can look into for your procurement process. At the same time, a lot of the policies and procedures and standards within HTM itself. What are we doing in terms of incoming inspection? Do we have the bandwidth to take on more work with our PMs and CMs? And just with gaps in inventory management. I struggled for many years, with many incentives for my biomeds to actually document network attributes as and when they got their hands on the equipment. Really wasn't too successful. One of the requests I got was, okay, we'll do what you want. It's part of our annual goals. We obviously get a better performance review if we do it. But then can you now give us an instruction guide, or can you write one on how I can go into the 3,000 plus models of devices and collect the network attributes? So it's very impractical. If I'm in corporate and if I have biomeds across 6 states, me building an instruction guide for them for over 3,000 models of devices, that's probably over 4,000 pages that no one's going to read. That's very impractical. So having a product that actually do that for you is far better than you working with biomeds to document all of that. Second thing, again, identifying bandwidth within HTM and your cybersecurity for vulnerability management. It's a lot easier for a manufacturer to release product update because they're dealing with one product, particular CVE, and then releasing a patch update or any kind of fix for it. But then for us in hospitals, you're dealing with, on an average, at least 10 to 12% of your inventory is connected. So if you're a 300-bed hospital, let's say you have about 30,000 medical devices, at least about 2,000 to 3,000 of those are connected. Maybe that's from 100 different manufacturers, and you have 200 different models. So consider the amount of work that you're going to have to apply patches if there is some critical CVE that's applicable to most of the operating systems for that, for those devices. So that's where, again, you're recognizing that, okay, there is an inefficiency in the process if I work through it without a product. So maybe a product can do a better job doing that for me. I think one of the most important thing, again, like we talked about, was identifying existing network security solutions. What is Palo Alto Networks actually doing? Not the Zinbox portion, but with your firewall management. What's Cisco ISE actually doing? What is your SIEM working on? And then is any part of that applicable to my medical devices? How can HTMs use the data and work collaboratively with cybersecurity? At the same time, reviewing policies within IT as well. One of the benefits I had having a governance that comprised of different stakeholders from IT, supply chain, and HTM was looking at their policies and how that applies to us. So with asset management or with vulnerability management, what is the time frame they have to apply patches, for example? So a lot of the IT groups, they'll say, critical patches within 24 hours. Non-critical, you have 30 days, 90 days, but that's really not enough in the medical device world. Then we go into data sanitization practices. And if you look at that, a lot of the practices within HTM is just demagnetizing a hard drive or just completely
Drilling holes
destroying
in
it. Exactly, but then IT has completely different procedures. They follow the DoD practices, and then they get the certificate of destruction. That's something that we adopt in HTM as well. Of course, I haven't seen a lot of products doing that, but that's just one of the program gaps that you'll have, and that's a manual workaround. I cannot just stress the importance of having FTEs. And I've dealt with senior leadership too, where they said, sorry, you guys don't have the data, so I'm not going to give you FTEs. You're already, they're going with what proven analytics, and you already have more than what you need. So I'm not going to give you more FTEs. But then when you look at the amount of work that you have with connected devices, you actually have a lot of data right there. It's not just because I don't want to name health systems that recently had ransomware attack, but then not just someone else had a ransomware attack, what medical devices went down, what happened with patient diversion, and then connect that with the amount of revenue loss that they're going to have. But what's worked for me in the past and I'm sure Chris, you can attest to that, is look at your cybersecurity state with medical devices. Talk about any regulations that you can that's going to make an impact, and then give financials. So what's the worst that can happen in terms of financial loss if those systems were to go down, or if they were to be render useless to clinicians? What's your alternate workflow for clinicians if all of your patient monitors went down, or if all of your lab systems went down, or if you just had no communication systems between what's happening in surgery to what's happening in your emergency department?
So little dirty laundry for UHS. So we were in the news last year in September, where we were struck by the riot ransomware that was, and the federal government got involved. It was the first time they saw this specific type of attack with riot. So to your point, in the end, now we did not have Asimily deployed at that point.
Good point.
I had started to work, and I was selling hard to get it deployed. But it did come out of my budget. It was budgeted for by me. I had the money in my budget, trying to get the powers to be, because it was in the approval process at the very high levels of our organization. And it was just a matter of getting them to sign off, and we could start the process of deploying. It didn't happen before September. And we got whacked, and I often wonder, had we had that in place, would we have seen the activity? Because we'll talk a little bit about some of the activity we see today now that we do have it deployed. But $56 million is what that cost UHS. We never paid ransom. We didn't pay any ransom. We had good backups for the most part. Out of the 122,000 medical devices, we had 97 devices that were affected. Mostly they were EEG computers, and we did have some MATLAB servers. Nothing was extricated. What was that?
All Windows-based stuff.
Yeah, it was all Windows-based stuff. Exactly. Yeah. So
when I worked as a biomed, I've had two incidents. One was pushing an update that IT recommended, and I brought down an entire neuromonitoring unit, and I've got screwed for that. The second one was I was on a night shift at that time, a graveyard shift. I had an EEG tech install games on a Windows-based EEG unit because he was bored sitting in and managing the patients that were, under morphine or something. And that particular system was also involved in an incident at that time, not something out of the hospital, but then it had eccentric activity near the patient bedside, but then the data showing at the physician's station was actually normal activity, and that was for an EEG activity. So you can imagine if that was actually, if the physician did not know that it was a discrepancy, or if the EEG tech at the bedside did not know that that was a technology-based discrepancy, that could have actually changed the treatment plan for that particular patient. So that goes back to the patient risk. I have quite a few stories.
Yeah, during the POC, we had a person that was going on the mammography system computer at 2 o'clock in the morning, doing their Phoenix education classes. Not on a regular IT workstation. They were on the Mamo station computer. Like you're what are you doing? What are you thinking? But yeah, I mean, and we saw stuff like this using the Asimily tool. One other thing I wanted to do before we moved on to the next slide was, Priya had a line item that supply chain and inventory management. One of the other aspects of these products is utilization. Now I can see utilization. So, again, during the POC, we had an order come in for 100 more infusion pumps. And, we decided to look, how many infusion pumps are we seeing on the network at any one time? And it was 36.1% of their inventory was in use at any one time, but they wanted 100 more. We're like, no, we're not buying 100 more infusion pumps. We wanted to buy another CT scanner, and the utilization was very, very low. And so you really get very, very good, it's an oh, by the way thing, but it saves your organization money. There's real dollars associated with it.
So with program gaps and evaluating those, there are some really good guidance documents available. Because in this CSF, post-market management is good. It's been there for a long time. One of the documents I really stress is the Medical Device Cybersecurity Guide that Amy published back in June 2018. I'm actually surprised a lot of people don't know about it, but then there's 13 different chapters for each phase of what you need to do with medical device cybersecurity. So take a look at it. I pretty much use that as my Bible, if you will. Of course, there's the hiccup documents from 2019 December. There's actually small, medium, and large organizations. It's not just limited to medical device cybersecurity, but just all of cybersecurity and what you need to do as a healthcare provider. And of course, the high-level guidance is the IT Joint Security Plan. And then you have the oldest of all of this is that cybersecurity for network medical devices containing the off-the-shelf software. Another new one that's coming up as part of HTA is what's called as the HTA Toolkit. That's entirely directed towards medical device cybersecurity and what one needs to do, right from identity and access management to using passive network monitoring solutions to incorporating patch management into your PM schedules. And I think probably the end of the year or something, Amy is going to publish that. So we've talked about the program gaps and how to evaluate your policies, procedures, all of that, and talked about why medical device cybersecurity is important. Chris will give an overview of what he's done to create a service framework to facilitate selection and implementation of a tool like Asimily or other products in this domain.
Yeah. So and we're still developing and honing our processes surrounding this. But since HTM does own this tool, it is paid for out of our budget. We do own it. And it's kind of an oh, by the way thing for the IT. Look at all these benefits you guys get on the IT side. But we own it. So my regional directors are involved. My directors are involved. We provide the credentials for folks who have access to the system. So not only the HTM people who have access, but also the local IT folks who have access and who are monitoring. There are thresholds, alarms that you can set within the tool to notify you of actionable items. But for the most part, the way that we've deployed it in UHS was through the HTM program, and our leadership council has that. So the implementation, part of our struggle is our hospitals, 28 hospitals, operate independently. They have their own IT departments locally. So when we started sending out the edge devices, it's just a small one-use server that's pre-configured, comes from Asimily pre-configured after our IT team fills out a form with a bunch of questions from our friends at Asimily. The device comes into the facility and it has to be connected to a span port typically. It can be there's a couple other methods that you can use, but typically we're connecting it on a span port off the core. In our case, we're using the core. One of the things is trying to get your IT team to connect the device, and that's what we struggle with most. So our plan to try and deploy by regions, we have our hospitals set up into East, Central, and West regions. That kind of went out the window, and we're kind of just working with our individual IT teams to try and deploy these devices. But our first facility down in South Texas deployed it. He said to me, Chris, it took me longer to take it out of the box than it did to get it connected on the network and for Asimily to start seeing data. So once it gets connected to the network, it sends information to their cloud, which through the use of their algorithms and tools, that's how we start to look at the dashboard of data that we see. So we're still managing through implementation for some of our facilities. They're still struggling out there that might not have available span ports and things like that available to them. And after implementation, we're looking at a lot of integration. So you heard Priya talk about the SIEM and our NAC. Cisco ICE is our network access controller. So we're looking at integration into that. And we're really moving down a pathway to use Asimily as our aggregation device, as our aggregation tool. Because I talked about a little bit earlier, our IT guy put up a screen from one of their tools that they use, and there were 71,000 issues that came up that, what do you look at? Well, we are thinking that by aggregating a lot of our data from these various tools, like Taos and other tools that we're using on the IT side, feeding that into the Asimily world, that we can start to really target areas of interest and things that are really troublesome. Governance. So we had a multidisciplinary team all the way through this whole process. So not only was it HTM, it was IT, it was the security IT team. We have our clinicians, our clinical applications folks. Trying to think, we had those folks. We use BD. So it's important to include all of those folks in this process as you're moving through the governance. Who's going to react? Who's going to answer calls? Who's the first one to take the call? And then how you get distributed. What's actionable? How quickly? You talked a little bit about some things. Hey, it's nice to know we can triage that for a later date, where some things you want to look at very, very quickly. So assigning those specific responsibilities to the stakeholders is important, and should have that in your policies and procedures as you move through this process.
All right, this is the fun part. So any questions so far? I know we talked about medical device cybersecurity, some metrics, and then what UHS has done in terms of pre-planning. What I want to talk about now is just what security solutions do we have available, and then what exactly does passive network monitoring do, and then what are some of the benefits of that, and then look at some qualitative and quantitative metrics on how a health system can actually measure a product and how viable that product is. So with network security solutions, I mean, you have a whole lot of these. Most of the solutions do analyze the hardware, software, and the different cloud services that you have running. And medical devices, now that they're built with all three components, we'll have to see what is the best solution to manage these devices. Looking at any hospital that's really wired, you're looking at some access control systems or tools. They have a standardized antivirus and anti-malware software. They have some post-intrusion detection systems as well. Obviously, you have management agents or software communication agents. You have your email security, your firewall systems. Network segmentation has been big. Of course, your event management systems too. A lot of the times, your network segmentation, profiles, the standard profiles that you see may not be applicable for medical devices. A lot of the times, it can get very exhaustive to manage the different segments of the network in enclaves that you're going to create for your medical devices. I think the best way to approach that is to analyze all of the cybersecurity risk for your medical devices and then create those segments based on the risk profile. So for example, you have high risk devices, maybe, have 3 different segments for just the high risk devices, such that you have one go down, you manage the other 2. And then you have your low risk on a different segment. That's far easier to manage. And of course, with Asimily, we can actually help with those different control lists as well and provide the data to enable segmentation.
Suggestions of segmentation. Yeah.
I think one of the key differentiators is, again, that we're giving recommendations to manage those risks outside of traditional segmentation and micro-segmentation. Something that's a lot more practical, where you're not consuming a whole lot of resources and just biomed and IT can actually work on. Again, coming to passive network monitoring, a lot of you are aware, one, as the name states, it does not disrupt any existing network-enabled services, which is so important for medical devices. Like I said, I've actually brought down an entire neuromonitoring unit pushing an update, and I would never do that again in my life. At the same time, what these PNM solutions are doing is they're capturing that network metadata, and using proprietary algorithms, they're able to classify what are those devices on that network, what are the different attributes for those devices, and then they'll help you create a more comprehensive inventory. Benefits of that, again, efficient, because you're avoiding a lot of the manual workflow. With that, avoids the use of on-site resources. Second, as you analyze the devices on the network traffic or from that traffic, these tools have a lot of subscriptions to different information security providers. They do a lot of research or exploit research as well. So they're actually assessing the different vulnerabilities and how that vulnerability can affect your medical device. Is it exploitable or not? That's another key feature with Asimily is we use a MITRE ATT&CK framework, look at the different techniques that an attacker can use to exploit that vulnerability for that medical device. So rather than just giving you, here's the 100 different CVEs, this is what's vulnerable, this is why your devices are in a high risk or a medium category, we're actually doing that exploit vector analysis for you and then telling you, yes, you have 900 high risk devices, but out of that 900, 23 are actually high impact. So that's going to make some sort of an impact on your patient safety, on your business safety and your data safety. So we're giving you a more workable list of what you need to tackle first, rather than worry about the entire 900.
Yeah.
So that's one of the benefits of a passive network monitoring solution. Along those sides, not only giving you that data of what's high risk and high impact, we're also telling you how can you best manage that. Let's say you have a device that's having network file shares, maybe disable that option, or disable internet browsing. Why do you need internet browsing on an EEG device? Or if you're going to have some sort of file transfer, make sure that that's in a secure communication channel, and you're avoiding the risk with any other unauthorized person getting into that communication pathway. Again, some areas of improvement with PNM solutions is you're not going to get perfect data. That's if someone's selling you that, telling you they're going to give you 100% perfect data, that's utter crap. You won't get that anywhere. And you're still going to need some amount of on-site resources to validate that misclassification. A lot of companies, and I know I'm part of Asimily now, but I'm really good friends with pretty much all of our competitors. One of the things I notice is a lot of the companies in this space will tell you that they're going to fix all of your problems with inventory management. That's impossible. because you don't get certain data in that network traffic. In fact, if you go to your BD, your Philips, your G's, even they'll tell you they don't release certain fields in that network traffic.
Yeah.
So there's no way you're going to get that. And getting your default encryption keys or any other keys to access that information, that's impossible unless you have some direct agreement with that manufacturer. So that's something, that's again an area of improvement. Maybe we'll have better algorithms to pass all of that information. But right now, it's not 100%. So you're going to need your on-site resources to do that, or some sort of an analyst that'll look at what's in your CMMS, what's at the site level or the device level, and then what's being seen in a tool, in a passive network monitoring tool, and then sort of correlate all of that. It's an interesting workflow, and most vendors, and I think when you do that too, where they'll give you different Excel sheets, we do that work for you, we give that, we'll give you a more comprehensive inventory back. So again, one of the things I wanted to touch back, and I know we've talked about various topics, and I don't want to make that confusing, but we started with, medical device cybersecurity, why HTMs need to own that, how you can do a program gap, how can you build use cases doing a program gap analysis. And then we talked about service model that Chris has and a governance framework. And of course, what's a passive network monitoring solution. Chris, if you want to talk about, UHS's experience with doing a pilot.
Yeah. So proof of concept, POC. And I want to go more quickly because I'm watching your time. There were a lot of vendors in the market space, and we chose a few of those to do a proof of concept. Unfortunately, Order got to the game very late in the game, and we were already down the, so they were not included. Scenario was involved in that, Medigate was involved in that, and Asimily was involved in that. We didn't choose Zingbox because of that Palo Alto. That was a brand new acquisition for Palo, and we just didn't know, based upon what happened with Security Matters, we didn't want to go down that route because we didn't know how Palo was going to treat Zingbox. So we put these 3 vendors in one of our facilities down in Texas. We chose that facility because they had looked at Forescout with Security Matters. Forescout is a NAC, a network access controller, and so they would have known what to compare. They had something to compare it against. So we chose those facilities down there to use the POC, and we started collecting data through these 3 vendors, and it was all simultaneous. It was all done at the same time. We didn't bring one in at a time. We had all 3 in at one time, and that way we could look at the data objectively. Who was discovering devices more reliably than the other one? Sometimes one had a very good grasp of IoT devices, your printers, your cell phones, things like that. They had a good grip on that, but on the IoMT side, the medical device side, they didn't do very, very well. So we were looking at all of those parameters. One of the things that we heavily was service. When we had a question and we called or emailed, how long did it take for the response? And with Asimily, it seemed like within minutes we were getting answers to our questions. Some of the other vendors, it was 24, 48, 72 hours before we would have the answer. So that was a big deal during our POC. But the classification of how accurate they were, how many devices they discovered, what the dashboard looked like, what kind of actionable data they were providing us. They're all the parameters that we were looking at to make our decision. But certainly the quality of device classification, cost was one thing. We had one vendor initially that was 5 times the cost of the 2 other vendors. Wow. What was that? And oh my gosh. So in order to try and do a better quality POC, I said, hey, we're going to eliminate you. Like, you guys aren't even in the same ballgame. Oh, what do you mean? What do you mean? And then all of a sudden, they dropped it magically I mean, hundreds of thousands of dollars, they dropped it. And you're like, wait a minute, why would you do that now? So they did stay in the game, but they still, they were liars.
Yeah. Left a bad taste.
As a HTM professional, when I worked at Banner, I've had my experience with that, where I think quality of the classification and the library of devices that product has, I think that matters the most. You have a lot of technical capabilities. Cost, of course, I've had my experience where we almost got like a 75-80% discount a day before we were making a decision. So that was automatically rejected by the board because it was like, why did you buff up the price in the first place?
Yeah.
What's going on now? But response, I think I particularly, when I worked for Banner and I had my POC, I had two vendors at that time, Asimily, one of those. It was actually the time when NotPetya ransomware information was released. So and I was in India and I had my team working here. And I said, add that as part of the POC. Let's see what the response time is, because we've had the tools or the appliances installed in two different hospitals now. We had a 700 bed and we had a 300 bed. So we can look at the different data sets and the quality that we get. And one of the benefits that happened with Asimily was within a day, we actually had the CEO itself respond back with, okay, here's your list of affected equipment. And we could, even though it was deployed in just 2 sites, we could match that with what we had in Ames and actually work on remediation. And we actually got recommendations. And this was a response when that vendor wasn't even a contracted vendor, and they were actually working to benefit the organization at that time.
Yeah.
So for me, I know that was one of the big things. And I've used Asimily as a customer. And when it was time I started looking outside, I said, okay, maybe I'll join them and see. That's an interesting one. So going into that, some of the things that, Chris, why did you actually choose this product? What were, in addition to the cost, quality of the data, and response times, what were some of the attractive features?
Yeah, some of the people involved in the organization as well. I had met, or talked with some of those folks. I felt comfortable in the product knowledge and what we were going after. They had a very well managed process for growth. Some of those other vendors were taking tons of money from VC venture capital. I was like, there's always strings attached with VC money, right? You gotta be careful with, and they were just taking millions of dollars, and I didn't have, they're going to want a return on that investment. And what does that do for research and development? The CEO Shankar of Asimily, he had a great plan, a very well managed plan, very well thought out. He was focused on healthcare versus, hey, I'm going to go into Home Depot and sell them an IoT product, things like that. So that all entered into the decision making. Now, number of years experience in healthcare cybersecurity landscape. This was, to me, it was brand new technology, but to look at those people who were leading the company, that was an important piece of the puzzle. So what was their background? Where did they come from to really get into this business? Some of the companies that were sales guys that would just jump around from company to company, maybe not even in the IT business, and they were trying to sell me on the cybersecurity tool. So that entered into the decision process. And how scalable, how quickly can we grow, and what was their investment into R&D? Man, even during the POC, we were getting new releases from Asimily on new pieces of information that they were working on out of the data for the algorithms. It was great.
So one of the things that we're doing, again, don't want to make it promo, but we actually put together an article for Amy. Again, that article is completely vendor agnostic, even though it's coming from Asimily. We're basically just wanting to give back something for the HTM community as a guidance, and how can you actually do your program assessment more prescriptively than what we have the slides here, and then what are some of the capabilities you need to evaluate so that a product meets the true needs of a healthcare provider in terms of medical device cybersecurity. So when you talk about customizations and feature enhancements, one of the things that was part of my proof of concept at Banner was obviously there's not a fully mature product. This is still a new space for the vendors as well as
For all of them,
providers. Yeah. So let us see what kind of partnership we're going to have with that vendor, and are they going to create enhancements or customization for our particular need at Banner. So again, that POC, that 3 weeks was when I was in India. We had about 22 enhancement requests that we wanted from 2 products, 2 vendors, and we had Asimily that actually completed all of those enhancements, customized it, whether it was something related to the GUI or policy management or looking at certain recommendations and the viability of that for a medical device, or even things like creating custom reports.
Yes.
So I think those are some of the capabilities that you want to look at when you're selecting a product. And I know we're almost out of time.
Yes.
But Chris, I really like this, what you said, and I know you talked about it, was it took you longer to take that edge device or the edge appliance out of the box than to connect it and start collecting data. That's because we actually configure, we do all of that work for you. So what the healthcare provider needs to do is really plug and play. Just take it to your server room. In some cases, back at Banner, I know we had a longer process because even though as a vendor, we did all of the scans and making sure that we're giving those scan results for your IT teams to review, Banner got the edge devices. They would actually do some sort of a burn testing and then rack them. So that took some time as well.
And even management of the device after it's installed as well. Asimily's doing all that. They're making sure that the operating system is up to date. Any kind of patch management that's involved just for the Asimily bot.
These are just some metrics. I know we're almost out of time, but real quick, qualitative, really, what's going to help you from a process perspective, from your, non-cybersecurity goals. Qualitative is, again, if you go into your CISO's office, you're going to see the wall board or your dashboard and all of these fancy metrics. And most CISOs want to see medical device related metrics. So what are the number of connected devices? What are you doing with those network attributes that you see? Are you able to identify location, where it's operating, or how it's being utilized? And then how many of those actually store, transmit, or display sensitive information? And the reason I say sensitive is it's not limited to just your EPHI, but any other identifiable information, or even your business sensitive, like any contractual information or your drug library data sets, that's confidential too. And then one of the most important ones is, what is the percentage of your medical devices that's prioritized as high risk, high impact, and those that have actionable recommendations to manage or mitigate those vulnerabilities? That's something that I talked about earlier, was you're not just identifying, okay, there are 900 high risk devices, but then the company is actually doing that exploit vector analysis and telling you out of 900, you only need to worry about 30, because that's what has an exploit path that an attacker could use to gain access into your network.
So you're not wasting all those resources,
Exactly.
or you're not taking devices and trying to segment them differently, wasting all of that time and effort to try and do that.
Yeah. And I think without a product, like a passive network monitoring solution, if your CISO or your CIO were to ask the HTM leader, hey, can you tell me what kind of web traffic is going on from your medical devices to countries outside the US? That's impossible to get. You're going to waste countless hours talking to manufacturers or any other service engineers. Most times you probably have to pay extra in order to do that. And these systems will actually do it for you. Or looking at what are the number of medical devices that have legacy operating systems. Or if you have a legacy operating system, that's okay, but do they have any services running that it's not supposed to run, and any services that can serve as an exploit path?
We use geo-blocking. We're good. We're good. Oh yeah. Put one of these boxes on your network.
All of these are available in detail in that paper, and I know these slides also will be available. Just some future steps, and I know, Chris, we talked about some. One was, back at Asimily, all of the training, it's a combined effort. Like I said, anything in the proof of concept stage, we have the solution engineering team that's focused and does that. Where I also partner with solution engineering is to make sure that we're training a customer on a routine basis. We have 24/7 support. In fact, I'm on the level 1 and 2 calls too. And then customizations are quick. There was one side of Asimily that I saw as a customer, but now part of the team, I can see how quick the turnaround time is with, developing certain enhancements with the engineering team. Super amazing team. And again, any urgent issues, and this is one example. We recently had the Swisslog, healthcare devices with the pond piper vulnerabilities. I think around 6 in the morning, we got to know about that, right from our CTO to me, CEO to me, all of us got involved. And practically by 10 or 11 a.m., all of our customers knew what was happening with, the pneumatic tube systems. Any affected customers that had that particular device and those software versions where they needed to apply patches, all of them were notified with the list. So you're looking at the response times there, which is also really important while choosing a vendor.
Yep.
And not just giving you information saying, hey, you have your pneumatic tube systems, you have your control stations. What do you need to do? What vendor, or how do you even coordinate with the vendor? We'll help you with all of that. And at customer success, which is my team, I come from a heavy HTM background. I've worked as a biomed, but I started as an unpaid intern for 1.5 years. That's how I learned it. Otherwise, I was mostly on the pre-market side. But you have the HTM expertise. We have a core cybersecurity person. I'm going to be hiring another one that has the healthcare IT or healthcare infrastructure experience. That way, for the customer, we're actually providing you a more holistic experience, not just, okay, we're dumping a product on you, but at the same time, we're training you on how to use that product more effectively and getting your good return on investment. At the same time, I know with UHS, we've rolled out sites pretty quick. We just had 3 last week, or earlier this week, actually, Wednesday, yeah. And, we'll help set up all of the user roles. We do trainings routinely and quality reports on an ongoing basis. One of the things we're also revamping here in customer success is to make sure that we're having bi-weekly cadences with the customer to remain engaged. At the same time, doing quarterly business reviews, so we can actually demonstrate the value you're getting out of the product that you've invested in, right? So again, we have review meetings, and just within the company as well, a lot of communication going on with identifying what are the true needs out in the field, communicating that to product management and engineering team, and we're having quick releases with different features as well. Just some of the lessons learned is this is a can of worms, this topic. So embrace the challenges that you're going to get. One of the things with me personally is I wasn't interested in cybersecurity. I was forced into it by my director back in Stanford at that time. I didn't have a choice, but embracing that's worked wonderfully for me, actually. And when you're doing this as a program, when you're handling this as a program, make sure you have a more comprehensive team of stakeholders. For example, with governance, we talked about different participants. You have your emergency management, your supply chain, even PR and legal on a need basis. Of course, your patient safety committee is also on a need basis, but
I think the consumer today is more educated, right? The healthcare consumer. I think communicating a tool like this, communicating that you're on top of cybersecurity, that you're concerned about cybersecurity, is a big piece of the puzzle.
Because you're going to have some clinical, some clinician leader or someone go to a conference or read something on the internet. They're going to come back and say, hey, do we have, device A? I actually read about this and I heard about it at a conference. So you have a product like this, you're immediately logging into their portal. You're looking at all of the, activity happening, and you're like, hey, yeah, we know about this. We got it handled. Don't worry. You're just making sure that you're communicating what's happening on the infrastructure side, what you're doing from a healthcare technology management perspective, and how that impacts care delivery as well. But yeah, lessons learned, really communicating is key. Project management, I cannot stress enough on that. Yeah,
working this.
Really need to focus on managing the project and just getting into the basics of PM. Partnering with IT, we can no longer have a tug of war. Having the right governance.
I'm pretty much part of it.
I think the moment back at Banner, when I had the governance committee, that's when I had support from pretty much all the leaders within IT. No problems with funding, just some issues with FTEs, but that's pretty much across the board. integrations, all of the different tools at the same time. You can make sure that there's no redundancy and you can actually have very good automated workflows with all of your integrations. I know this took a little bit longer than we had hoped, but
Does Children's have any IoT, IoT tool deployed that you're aware?
Yes.
Yeah.
Medicaid.
okay.
Question for you. Once a vulnerability is found, what's like the common practice out there, like documentation? Because we don't know whether in the CMS over one work order or 13,000.
So if you're like say it affects
13,000.
Yeah, so we do, each device gets a, now we can mass upload, so we can do, right? Here's my CMMS guru, here, we can mass up, open and close. Yep.
Yeah, we're getting to that, how to document all
I think
Yeah,
that's sort of like your CYA strategy for
Yeah.
medical devices, because the whole purpose of having a service history is to know what happened, who touched the device, what went on. So if you have to mass upload 30,000 documentation sets, you just have to do it.
Right, and the integration for two.
Yeah, exactly.
If you close it on one side, you should close it on the other side. So if you have works assembly or whatever your product is,
Yeah.
and you close it there, it should close the work order that it generated.
A lot of products, like for example, I can speak to us. I know orders, but I don't want to speak about that. But what we have is you can look at the vulnerability. It'll give you a recommendation, and you have a fix button. Whether you want to apply a fix through Cisco ICE or through Palo Alto or through any other tool that you have, or you want to apply a manual fix, you can actually type in that, click on proceed, and if it's communicating that particular field through your CMMS, it will actually generate the work order on its own and then document it, close that work order as well. So, and if you have good metrics with your CMMS, which I'm sure you can, let's say you had a work order type saying IT security or cybersecurity, and you want to look at what work orders did I have in the last 38 days. You can actually get your report for that, right? Your work order report.
Yeah, that we actually documented IT service now.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
so they generate the work orders to me. And again, we'll get the HTM departments at the hospitals involved, but the final findings we'll put on that.
And if you have a good CMDB for your medical devices, then for sure use service.
Well, because everything's considered a configuration item.
Yeah.
It's either a clinical model or software, and that's all in our CMDB, which is ServiceNow. So, that's just how that works.
And to the outsourcing aspect changes that.
Yeah, right.
So you have to document that in the IT side versus GE isn't going to do that for you, right?
No.
Without charge.
Let's say that we're more than willing to do it.
So, yeah.
Children's, what CMMS are you guys on?
Minimum.
Oh, we actually just we have an integration with Metamizer now.
Okay, that's good.
We have a presentation coming up on the 29th September.
How many S-bombs are you actually seeing now?
Should I give you a number just because you're without it?
I'm
But no,
just curious, are you
S-bombs
seeing it
are-
on those products now?
No.
That's good.
I'll tell you, most manufacturers that are active participants in the ISACs are the only ones that are
Okay, that's the same ones
giving
I'm
you
getting.
response. So in case where you have a new device and there's really no MDS2 also, and I've had, for example, not to target anyone, but Mindray, for example, they have a lot of new fancy ultrasounds coming out into the market, right? They probably don't have an MDS2, and if you ask them something, it's easier for them to fill out a 2004 version of the MDS2, which is just a single page, as opposed to the 2019, which is like 176 questions. One of the things I mandated back at Banner was, no, you got to fill up that entire sheet. That's the only way we'll know what you're bringing into the organization. So that document is again open source. It's available on the website. I think it's a HIMSS and FEMA or no, NEMA, sorry, gosh. NEMA page. You can just Google 2019 MDS2. You'll get that Excel page. Have that maybe tweak a little bit, add your organization's logo, all of it. Use that.
And you push them because they shouldn't have a product go to market without having an MDS2. They shouldn't have it go to market without an MDS2 and an S-bomb. But
You require that, don't you, Chris, when you buy new models?
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought you talked about that. Because I used your stuff years ago.
Well, thank you.
Thank
Thanks
you
for
all
hanging
for
in.
staying late. We took up some happy hour time, so thank you.
Right. Last night was happy enough for,
You can buy us all drinks
there we go.
at the free bar.
Thank you so much, Chris.